I'm very happy to be here with you. Being in university for me is being at home. And as a university teacher, I feel really amazed of having you here. Well, we've been talking a little bit about property rights, so I won't talk you a lot about it. However, I will tell you basically how we develop the index and what we are measuring. Because when we want to achieve a goal, nothing is better than measuring it. And for that, an index is a wonderful key tool. So what we did is to create an index of 3 components. We tried to create an index to be complex in the sense that could have more than one dimension. In the first component, we get some information about the legal and political environment of each country. And in that sense, we take care about the judicial independence, the rule of law, the political stability, and the control of corruption. Those are elements that should be like the base, the base ground where our property rights could be, could emerge, could ground. The second component we talk about physical property rights. We want to know how people feel the protection of physical property rights are in their country, and that's we take from the Global Competitiveness Index. How easy is to register your physical property, how many days it takes to you, how many procedures you have to follow, and how is the ease of access of loan. And this is because maybe you don't have property now, but you want to get one, and you can leverage yourself through the financial system. And the third component is the intellectual property right. Again, we want to know how is the perception of the population about how well, how strong are these property rights in the country, how is the patent protection, and how big is the copyright piracy. With all these elements, what we do is to make a simple average of the 3 components. And inside of each component, all the element has the same weight. Of course, as we take data from different databases, the first thing we have to do is to rescale everything to final one from 0 to 10, from worst to best. And then we make a ranking qualification. This year, we got to get 129 countries. The only one reason we do not include a country is because it has not enough data. We require each country has 60% of the information of each component. The countries we took in this edition are equivalent to the 94% of world population and almost 98% of world GDP. So we can say we have a relevant sample this year. And we included now 5 new countries: Angola, Bolivia, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and Macedonia. However, we couldn't include this year Madagascar by the reason I already mentioned. They didn't have enough information. Well, this is the result. I'm not so sure you can read it from where you are now. However, you can download all the information which is in the website. And of course, you can make all the comparisons between the different countries. As an average, we can see that this year we had a little slide back in the International Property Right Index. It's not statistically significant. However, we don't know to sweep it under the how do you call it? Well, we don't want to hide that information. What we want is to show it. It's not statistically relevant, but the reason it's because the legal and political environment all over the world has decreased. Because if you see the other 2 components, however, they have improved. So this is one thing we have to take, let's say, to focus and follow how it evolves. We also ranked the countries and gathered them by quintiles, and you can see that the first three has almost the same amount of country of the two last one. This gives us an idea of how much room we have to improve in our world in these kind of situations. This year, Finland leads the International Property Right Index, and it's followed by Switzerland, which, by the way, in Finland also leads the intellectual property right, the intellectual property right component, which, by the way, is followed by the United States. In the third place is New Zealand, which leads the legal and political environment, and in the fourth place is Singapore, which also leads the physical property right component. If we compare the top 15 with the bottom ones, we notice that the legal and political environment is one of the strongest elements in the top one and one of the weakest elements in the bottom one. So this is a very relevant hint that we want to focus, because this is that ground in which we can base a strong system of property rights. We also see that once a country gets to the top, it remains in the top. So we have seen during the last 3 years the same countries, however, with a little different lineup. But they grab to those good places, which means that when a society realizes that this works, they keep working on that. And we see that because the top ranks also had increased in time. So it's not only that it's the same country, but it also has a higher score. We also gathered the countries by geographical regions, by development criteria, by income criteria. By the way, it has the same lineup than our index, and also by integration agreement groups. Why we use this last one? Because sometimes we have found that to introduce, for example, a law inside a country could be very difficult. However, if you are part of an international agreement and this is part of that agreement policy, you can advance faster inside your country. Also, as we've been mentioned, what we want is that people is the one who has to get those property rights. And that's what we want. However, our unit of analysis is a country. And we have countries highly populated and countries very small. So we pondered our index by population, and we find that it decreased a little. And this is because most of the country has mid or mid-low levels of property rights. So one thing, again, to focus is try to foster property rights in countries densely populated. And you can check, let's say, information given in graphs like this carefully in the website. When you have a lot of information, you have how the country has changed its score, in which level it is, in which geographical area it's placed, and which size of population it has. So taking care of this kind of graphs, you can read and have many ideas of how it's going on in the world. And by the same reason, we also have a gender equality component, because we want to know how those rights inside each country are equally granted for all its people. And in this case, we used the database of the OECD, the Gender Institution and Development Database, and used 10 elements to create that component. This year, again, we have seen a reduction of the international property right pondered by gender, which is something that has nothing to do with the index itself, but by the gender equality component. So this means we have also to take care about this situation. And we make also the same organization of the index by quintiles, and we can see also with the gender ponderation that we have almost the same situation. The first three quintiles have the same, more or less, amount of countries that the last two ones. There is a difference when we make this kind of ponderation, what happens with the groups or with the country. For example, there are groups like the advanced economy that has more or less the same behavior when they are pondered or not. However, for example, you can check Latin American countries, they improve because they are better in gender than in the property rights. On the other hand, countries of, for example, Middle East and Pakistan, for taking some of them, they reduce because they have stronger property rights than gender equality. So these are elements that we have to take care when we read this kind of index pondered by gender. And as Lorenzo said, we try to do every year different kind of correlations with different indexes, because we don't want only to talk about property rights, not only because they are human rights, as we already said, but because of their positive elements that they can promote in society. So we try to see how these ecosystems are built. So in this year, we took an analysis about 18 indices organized in 3 groups of them: economic outcomes, institution, and innovation. When you see, for example, we worked with GDP per capita, and GDP pondered by the Gini index, trying to capture a little bit of inequality. The gross capital formation, like a proxy for investment, the global entrepreneurship index, and the economic complexity index. You may see that the highest correlation was with the global entrepreneurship index. So not only property, but entrepreneurship get a positive feedback among between themselves, so they can promote a better and stronger ecosystem for economic growth. By the way, all the correlations are really strong, but the highest was the one I mentioned. We also did it by the different components. They are positive, however, they are lower than were combined with the 3 components of the index. And we also want to highlight that we have seen that the average per capita income of the top quintiles is nowadays 16 times the one of the bottom one. So even 16 is a huge disparity. I have to say it has been reduced. It was just 5 years ago, 24 times. This gives us an information that we are improving. We have a much room to improve, but we are getting better in that sense. In the case of correlations with institutional indices, we use the institutional quality index, the corruption perception index, the illicit trade environment, the inform index, and the civic activism. In this case, we wanted to grab a little bit about social capital too. So from all of them, the corruption perception index was the one with the highest correlation. And this is the element that we all, like citizens, want to discourage corruption. So we see that these are both elements that are present in a robust ecosystem. In the case of innovation, we worked with the Global Biotech Innovation Index, the Indigo scores, the ICT Development Index, many elements that took information about the infrastructure of telecommunication and the practice of using these new technologies like smartphone penetration and the network readiness index and the global connectivity index too. From all of this, the global biotech innovation was the highest in the correlation, which is another element. By the way, the global biotech innovation index is the only one we are using that do not covers the 129 countries. It only covers 54 of our sample. However, it's really high, and of course, it was done for them only. The second highest correlation was with the Network Readiness Index, and it covers all the countries we have in the sample. So all these correlation, as any of us could say, were guided by the eye of the researcher. So I choose that index, made a correlation, etc. So we decided to get all the information we have just gone through, and through a cluster analysis, try to see how the countries are organized. And when doing the cluster analysis, we managed to have 3 clusters that were enough to explain the countries' grouping. This case, the best way to see these clusters result, I think, is this way, because the other one is really tricky and you don't see much more from there. And you can see that countries are organized in these 3 ones. The red, the green, and the blue are from those with less or bottom scores to the highest one. And what you can see also, if compared with previous year, is that the centroids of the cluster have moved to the right, given an idea of improvement all over in the world. Of course, there is much countries here than over there, but we have seen them to move to the right. Excuse me?
Could you explain the previous graph again, like the two things you took in the graph, y and x?
Here?
Yeah. So what is the y-axis and what is the x-axis?
Oh, yes. This is the factor. When we made the cluster analysis, one factor grabbed more than 86% of the weight, and this is the one we are graphing, the first factor that captures most of it. And here we have the other one, okay?
Okay, so countries in the left, what does that show? Is what I didn't understand. What do the countries in the left depict?
They have lower scores than those ones, okay? And but we include these kind of scores that you are seeing is not only of our index, of the international property right, but also of the other 18 I've been shown that we made the correlation. So this is the behavior, let's say, more holistically sane, because you include all of them. The same clusters are organized by groups. So you can see for the biggest size of the letter, where are mainly those countries placed in the cluster. That means that high-income countries are basically in cluster 3, or sub-Saharan African are in cluster 1. And then, as you may, we said before, in cluster number 2 is where countries with highest population belong. And when we see the clusters, what we are really, let's say, like final analysis is that we have 2 extremes from the 1 and the 3, but the second one makes much more no difference in the balance of the cluster. However, it gets the most amount of the population. So I like also to focus mainly on those countries that are in the borders of 2 clusters, trying to figure out what they could do to mind the gap and move to the right. Generally speaking, this year we can say that the index, even as I said at the beginning, even it decreased in average in the world. It was not statistically significant. However, we must focus on those elements that are pushing back the property rights all around the world. And basically, it is the legal and political environment. So those elements should be under our analysis for these years. And we have seen that we have strong association with corruption perception index, global biotech innovation, the institutional quality index, and the global entrepreneurship index as elements that we can say are present in what we call a robust ecosystem for property rights. And I will give you some information about the result of Singapore for this year. Well, Singapore's scores this year is 8.462, increasing from previous year, and it ranks first in Asia and fourth worldwide. These results are because of an increase in the legal and political environment. However, there was a small decrease in the physical and political and physical property right, and it improved in the intellectual property right. So all of this information, I mean, I'm very sure you can check it much better through the web, because I understand that some of you are doing like this, like you're not looking very well. So what I want to highlight is the registering property system is really strong in Singapore, which is a very good news. However, let's say that the weakest element that we have here is the copyright piracy. I don't want you to read this information like we were grading countries, nothing like that. What we want is to give information to know where you have your strength and where you have your weakness, we can call it that way, so you can focus on them. This is good not only for us like academics, but for policymakers and even for those who want to make lobbies to improvements in society. We can see, and you can see this in the web, how it has been evolved on time, not only the index, but the components, and even all the elements of each of the components. By the way, our database could be asked for any of you giving us an email, and we can send you all the database, and it's free, by the way. And you can see also how it's ranked by groups of countries. In these cases, I had the slide of Asian countries, and how it is if, for example, compare to different countries that you can compare also in the web. And you also can see, for example, the change that has happened during the last 5 years. And we can see that even Singapore is in a very high level, it's still getting improving, and that was a positive trend during the last 5 years. Well, thank you very much.